This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports.
If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Latirzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Latirzo and Jack Hirsch.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fist. My name is Frank Latirzo, former writer, full-time observer. This week we have a special guest. Instead of Jack Hirsch, we have Mr. Don Majeski, matchmaker and historian extraordinaire, who joined us last week. We had a great show. Jack is celebrating his birthday tonight, and Don agreed to pinch in. We loved them. We had a great time last week. And Jack and Don, it's too bad because, today being Jack's birthday, we could have asked him about what it was like sitting ringside for Tony Dempsey.
Absolutely. And he would have given us a first-hand report. Happy birthday, Jack. I can't fill his shoes tonight, but I'll try my best to make it entertaining.
No, we're in good company. Jack, Don, there are so many things I want to get to tonight. I don't have much of a list because you can go down any road. But last week we touched on it. And it dawned on me during the week when I knew you were coming on that I thought you are the only person that I know who attended Ali Frazier 1 live, as did I. But you also attended another super big fight, maybe one of the biggest fights ever, along with Super Fight 1. And that was the Ali Foreman Rumble in the Jungle. That is, and then you told me, go ahead.
No, it's very fortunate to have been at both, yes.
What I would like to ask you is, and you're the only person I can talk to about this. I was at Ali Frazier 1 Super Fight, and I know how big that was. I was only 13 years old, but I knew what the electricity was that night and the anticipation. It was, you could cut the air with a knife. It was unbelievable. How would you compare that to the Foreman fight, being that it was out of the country? It was 4:00 in the morning and the circumstances were different. Where Ali Frazier won, we really didn't have an idea how it was going to go. They were so evenly matched. Neither had come close to losing before. But when you fast forward 3 years later and you have Ali Foreman, as huge as it was, I don't think the anticipation was quite there because I think most people felt that Ali was going to lose and that would be his last fight and his way out.
Yeah, Frank, the amazing thing with Ali, and he's the consensus, he's the greatest heavyweight of all time. Certainly he's number one on my list. And yet the two of the times he fought for the world heavyweight title, first with Liston and then with Foreman, he was a huge underdog. Whereas Joe Louis was never an underdog in any fight he ever had. Even with Marciano at the end, even with the rematch with Schmeling, he was a favorite in every fight he ever had in his entire career. Yet Ali was obviously underestimated. And now nobody could say he wasn't the greatest, or few do say he wasn't. But there are two contrasting things. If you were a hardcore fight fan, and I remember the Ali Frazier, the buildup was incredible. 2 undefeated heavyweight champs of equal, they had equal merit in claiming to be the championship. Ali did go out of the ring for 3.5 years. It wasn't on his own choice, but Frazier truly established himself as the champion. He had knocked out an undefeated Buster Mathis to get the New York version of the title. Then he goes ahead and unifies it with Jimmy Ellis, who really was a legitimate champ. He went into a tournament, which Frazier declined to do. And then, of course, he beats Ali. So, and there were 2 Olympic champions. It had never happened, unprecedented. And there was 2 guys probably at their peak, although ironically, Ali lasted longer than Frazier subsequent to that first fight. He went on to have the championship again and have another dozen defenses of the title. But for a pure fan, with the Ali Foreman fight, a lot of it was that mystique at the Rumble in the Jungle in the middle of the Congo, like a resurrection. It was quite an amazing location, and that was the build up there. But Ali was tainted. He had lost to Frazier. He had lost to Ken Norton, and he was given very little chance to win. And Foreman had bowled over Frazier, bowled over Norton. stopped George Chuvalo, only the second guy to do it in his career after Frazier had done it a couple of years earlier. And he was a guy that everybody thought. I remember writing, and I was wrong in that assessment before the fight, that George Foreman is Sonny Liston had he won the title at 24 years of age. He was going to be champ for 10 years. And it was amazing, the upset. And I think the result was probably more amazing to people, or made it more of a great event than just the fact that Ali and Foreman were fighting, because they were dismissed. The Ali Frazier first fight was the biggest grossing fight of all time and made millions, which is one of the reasons they didn't fight the rematch, because the fights could never agree on a purse after getting the $2.5 million that dwarfed everything preceding it. The Foreman fight, they got double. They got $5 million apiece, and that fight lost a lot of money because it was underwritten by the Zairian government at the time, a fellow Mobutu Sese Seko, who was overthrown years later. But it was disproportionate amount of money to what the fight grossed. And as you said, Frank, a lot of the reason for that is a lot of people just wrote off Ali. They thought it would be a mismatch.
You know, it's funny that when you think of those three guys and how big those fights were, it's like they were all undefeated until they faced each other.
Yeah.
Frazier was the first to beat Ali.
Mm-hmm.
Foreman was the first to beat Frazier. Ali was the first to beat Foreman. And it's like they're just so intertwined, and they have completely different styles, completely different personalities. And again, I can't touch on the Rumble in the Jungle other than as a 16-year-old kid, I remember thinking that I don't think Ali's going to get, I'm not sure he's going to win, but I don't think he's going to be embarrassed and be humiliated like Frazier and Norton were. As far as the first fight, Don, I was addicted to boxing before that. And once I lived through that, there nothing will ever pass that. I mean, I've said this to Jack a million times.
Yeah.
It was the one event in my lifetime where I couldn't picture either guy losing to the other guy. But yet I knew the morning after that, that one of those guys would have a loss on the record. And I'd look at pictures of Ollie's and I'd just say, he said so many things about Frazier negative. It's like, he can't let him win. And then I'd look at the picture of Frazier and I think, but yet his whole career may be defined by this fight. And if he loses this fight, he'll be looked at as a champion, like maybe Ernie Terrell or Jimmy Ellis. So then when you get that, and then you take into consideration, their styles were completely different. One's weakness was the other one's strength, and vice versa. One liked being that center of attention, the other one didn't. It's just like, there's nothing that I don't think I'll ever live through anything like that. And I'm one of the rare people, Don, to think that despite he lost, I still think that's one of the best fights Ali ever fought. He just happened to have that wrecking machine in front of him that night.
Absolutely. You know, people would always have them because he wasn't a great puncher. Oh, Ali doesn't have heart. When it starts to get rough, he'll quit. And boy, coming off the deck in the 15th round of that fight was remarkable for both. I said the fight started with a question mark and it ended with an exclamation point. Yes, Frazier won. The knockdown cemented it, but it was a close fight. But Ali got up, and Ali recuperated from that fight much faster than Frazier. He was back in the ring in July fighting Jimmy Ellis, who was, again, a legitimate heavyweight champ. Then Buster Mathis. And then I think he fought either Jurgen Blin, was it, in December? And then he
fought Jurgen Blin.
Right? And then remarkably, in 72, he took on about a dozen contenders. Patterson, Bob Foster, Max.
He fought 6 times in 72.
Fantastic.
If you remember, Don, if you remember, his goal was, because he was more apt and anxious for a rematch than Frazier was, but his goal was to eliminate all the contenders. So Frazier had nowhere to go. And if you think about it, who was the one guy he never fought? Foreman. And why was that? Because Dick Sadler told Ali, we love you, Muhammad, but we want to fight the man with the title, and he's a better fit for us than you. And that's basically how that came to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they sort of, they were trying to push I remember what the politics were. that Frazier and Ali were battling it out. They wanted $5 million guarantee. Well, there was no Zaire in the picture in 1972 and 73 when they were getting closer to the fight. And they started fighting other guys. Frazier took it easy for Terry Daniels and Ron Stander, before losing to Foreman. And then what happened is they went to the WBC, which was a nation organization at that time. Hardly anybody ever heard of the World Boxing Council. And the World Boxing Council announced they were going to have George Foreman fight Oscar Bonavena for the WBC title if Frazier didn't sign to fight Foreman. And they did, thinking that was a very easy fight for them because Foreman, as you recall, came up like a rocket. But then he sort of stepped back and stopped fighting really competitive fights. And the last dozen fights he fought before Frazier were a lot of knockovers. And I think what people had anticipated Foreman, they lost a lot of faith because he wasn't fighting the Quarries and the Pattersons and the Bonavenas that logically he would have progressed to after he stopped Boone Kirkman. He regressed in the terms of the opposition that he fought. So I think they took him lightly and they figured, we'll get by this and then we'll have the Ali fight. And they made a big mistake. Foreman turned out to be a great fighter and just didn't have the style to be Ali. But who knows if Ali and he would have had a rematch.
Don, you are the only person, and I said this to Jack on this show repeatedly. You're exactly right, but it seemed that you're the only person besides myself that picked it up. Foreman came out like gangbusters, but if you look at his record, after the fight of the century, they did pull him back because they knew they were in line and they didn't want to take a chance, and he had soft touches. And then once Frazier won the fight, Dick Sadler knew that Frazier was a better matchup for George, and that's basically how it came to be. And another thing that Jack and I disagreed on, and maybe you can break the tie here, was, and you did touch on it, was Ali and Frazier were having a hard time getting together in 72 because, remember, Ali wanted purse parity again, and Joe Frazier said, no, we did it the first time. I beat him. I'm the champ. And Ali's argument was, well, you know what? You're fighting Standard and Daniels on home TV, and I'm fighting all the contenders, and the fights are beamed all over the world. So the people are still coming to see me, despite you're the champion. And Joe Frazier told Yank Durham if he didn't make the fight with Foreman, he was going to go outside of him and make it. And at the end of the day, Ali did get a little bit bigger of the percentage for the rematch than Frazier did. Can you verify that?
Yes, that's my understanding. Well, I think they fought the rematch when they both have come off. Remember, they had both come off the losses. As Ali fought Frazier. Here's how great Ali was. He beat Frazier and Foreman the same year, 1974. So I think they got 1.2 million guaranteed. An interesting thing for the first fight, they were going by traditional guarantees. I may have touched on this the last time we spoke, where they were going to guarantee, the Garden wanted to guarantee him 30% of the gross apiece against $1 million guarantee. And the fight was made because a theatrical producer, Jerry Perenchio, had a friendship with Jack King Cook, who owned the Forum in LA and the Lakers at that time. And he had owned the piece, I think, of the Washington Redskins and later the LA Kings hockey. And he plopped down this guarantee of $2.5 million. The Garden put up $500,000 to get equity in the show. And Jack King Cook came up with a guarantee of $4.5 million. But guarantee at that time, it was unprecedented. Patterson, I think, grossed $1 million with one of the listings. Yes. But it wasn't on a guarantee. It was against the traditional percentage, 40 or 50%. I think they grinded Liston down to 12% to get the fight. Patterson got a huge percentage, but no one was guaranteeing that kind of money. It was astronomical. So of course it made the $5 million even greater. So yeah. And I'll tell you one insightful thing in the business. What had happened with Foreman is after he fought Kirkman, they sold 50% of this contract to a guy named Marty Ehrlichman. Ehrlichman was a theatrical agent who managed Barbra Streisand. He may still be living today. And he paid $250,000. And Sadler and a guy, Henry Winston, there were a bunch of con men involved with George Foreman at that time.
Right.
They got $250,000. They said, look, we got $250,000. Why take a risk? Why give this guy anything? We'll take fights. And if you look at his career, he's fighting in Oklahoma City. He's fighting in Tampa. He's fighting small fights, some for 10 to 20,000. Didn't matter. They had the $250 in their pocket. And when he's the only he and Jack Johnson, I think, well, not Johnson, because he fought in the States. It's the only heavyweight champ who won his title out of the United States
And
never
lost it.
defended in the U and lost it out and never defended. He won the title in Jamaica. He defended in Japan against Roman. He defended in Venezuela against Norton, and he lost the title to Ali in Zaire. And one of the reasons was they wanted to avoid Ehrlichman, who kept trying to attach his end of the purse to get the money back, and they never paid him. So that's one of the reasons why he coasted. They say, hey, we don't have to take a risk. We don't have to take.
You think he accidentally knocked himself offline, Brian?
Hold on. All right, we're back.
You're back.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So, they figured we don't have to fight the Quarries, the Pattersons, the Bonaventas, these bigger fights where we get a bigger purse because we've already got the equivalent of that in this money we sold out. And so that's why they didn't fight in the States, to avoid these lawsuits.
Now, I knew this would happen. I was going to go in one direction, and I hope I remember to go back to it. But you said something that made me think of it. If you remember, after Foreman fought, he defended against Norton. There was talk of him fighting Jerry Quarry in 73.
Yeah.
And Foreman supposedly said that, he didn't want that fight, and they talked about him fearing Quarry. And look, Don, I'm a huge Jerry Quarry guy. I just think it was impossible not to love him and root for him. But let's be honest. Jerry Quarry in 1973 would not have had a snowball's chance, where, to beat George Foreman.
Oh, I agree with you. It's sad they didn't make it, because I remember there's a famous Ring magazine cover with Quarry versus Foreman on the front. He had come off that spectacular one-round knockout of Ernie Shavers, and it was a fight you think would have made itself. But they went and fought Ken Norton. I think the Garden, we touch on the Garden, why they fell out of boxing, once the biggest promoter in the world. They lost touch. They probably should have signed Foreman if they could have, but there's something that precluded them in antitrust at the time from signing fighters left over from the Jim Norris era. But they missed the boat. They had control of Joe Frazier, which is one of the reasons the fight ended up in the Garden with Ali, but they didn't have it with Foreman, and they want to control their own destiny. Otherwise, that match would have been made. But yeah, he opted to fight again with fight Norton, and Frazier and Quarry fought a rematch, as you recall, as a non-title fight, and that was the payoff fight
in June of 74, right?
Yeah.
If you remember, didn't they wanted the fight of the century at the Forum, but Frazier would not fight there. That was one of his preclusions. He would not fight there because he didn't like the way they scored the fights and the scoring system in California.
Correct. And again, he had a loyalty to the Garden. Remember, to Brenner and Markson, who really made him champ. They got the New York Commission when they opened the new Garden in 68. He stepped out of that WBA tournament that eventually had Jimmy Ellis winning it. They put him with Buster Mathis, who had beaten him in the amateurs, but had not risen to that kind of recognition as a professional. But they got the New York Commission to approve it. Then he fought Manuel Ramos. Then he fought Quarry. And these are all New York Commission world title fights. And yet he drew great crowds with Quarry and with Mathis. So he was beholden to them. And I admire their loyalty. And look, Frank, it belonged in the Garden. That was a great event for New York. And for us, yes. And
absolutely.
The fight of it was in California.
Now, you mentioned earlier that, and I'm going to get to you about how you rate fighters and rank them, but you said that, Ali is the consensus number one. Here's a question for you. I have my top five are Ali, Lewis, Foreman, Holmes, and number five, I go back and forth with a couple guys. But my question is this. Had Foreman not made his successful comeback, I think he would have been rated a lot lower than he is today. And my problem with that is, just like with Sonny Liston, he's another guy I think is underrated.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have long, accomplished title reigns.
Right.
But if you look who they lost the title to, and if most people agree that Ali should be number one, how do we hold it against Liston and Foreman for not making 7 or 8 title defenses when they lost to the guy who is the consensus great. And if you take Ali out of the picture, if he never gets his bike stolen and he doesn't become a fighter, you could make a case that Sonny Liston was the best heavyweight in the world from, say, 1958, and probably would have had that distinction through Frazier, maybe up till 68 or 69. And Foreman, if there's no Ali, how long does he hold the title after that? So it's like, I don't count that against him because I just think he was that formidable. Now, look, his comeback kind of padded that record, and now he gets the benefit of the doubt. But it's like there's a lot of cases where a guy is really good, but they lose to that all-time great, and they get kind of pushed back.
Yeah, 100% I agree with you. No, it doesn't dismiss the guy's great. You lose to the very, very best. Lou Gehrig batted after Babe Ruth. That doesn't say he wasn't one of the greatest ball players that ever lived, maybe the greatest first baseman. He just was in the shadow of the greatest player. And Ali, yes, if you dismiss that. Sonny Liston was my first idol as a kid growing up, the first fighter I paid attention to. And I tell people, well, let's do this. Throw out the two Ali fights, which people dispute the outcome and what happened there. Even if you take them 100% legit, throw out the two Patterson fights, where he won back-to-back one-round knockouts, and look at the wealth of that career, knocking out Wayne Bethea in one round, knocking out Mike DeJohn, Nino Valdez, Zora Foley,
Cleveland
Williams twice, a phenomenal run. If we had the same system today, or then as we have today, the WBC or the WBA would intervene and said, after the second Johansson fight, either you fight Liston or we're stripping you of the title. And Liston and Foley would have been a de facto heavyweight championship, and he would have had the 10 title defenses that would have enhanced, his recognition as a champion. I also agree with you on the Foreman thing. If he did not knock out Mora, I think he would have been dismissed to a great. He did not fight the quality of opposition that Liston did, where he was blowing over everybody and not
on the way up.
Yeah, and then afterwards, after he beat Mora, if you look at that, he really steps back. He doesn't fight a real competitive fighter. After that, he loses to Briggs. That was a disputed fight, but he's fighting guys like like Ellis, and the Schultz fight was very controversial.
Axel Schultz, right?
Yeah,
Alex Stewart, right?
That's because he did that. He's rated, and I think he's a better fighter than Larry Holmes. But Larry Holmes is diminished, where Foreman is enhanced so much by that. He's been in legendary fights for him from the beginning, waving the flag in the Olympics, even with the loss, the win over Frazier, the way he did it, and coming back with more. Whereas Larry, has had more title defenses, more consistent over his career, but Foreman with that explosive power and winning that title, it just changed the whole perception of him as a fighter and as a champion.
I think, and here's my tiebreaker, and this is why I have Foreman over Holmes. Number one, I do think the Foreman who was 40-0 with 37 knockouts at his peak, who fought Ali and Zaire, I think he beats the best Larry Holmes I ever saw. But on top of that, I do think, as you said, he has better wins and more legendary wins. So that would be the tiebreaker. And then if I take Foreman and I move him up to Holmes's era, I think he does as well or better. Or if I take Holmes and I bring him back to Foreman's era, I'm not sure he does quite as good.
Yeah. I would like to see how Larry Holmes would have done with a Joe Frazier. I think Frazier is Larry overall a better fighter, but that would have been, he would not have demolished him in the manner in which Foreman did. That's for sure. I mean, that was in both fights, really, he just overwhelmed him. And Foreman could take you out with a couple of, look what he did there's the one comparison, Ken Norton versus Foreman and Ken Norton versus Larry Holmes. And I think the Ken Norton fought Foreman was closer to
a better fighter.
Yes, better fighter. Yes. So
but Don, that is strategies. I'm sorry, style. That has a lot to do with it. But I agree with you. Think about this. Larry Holmes could not bring more to a fight with Frazier than Ali did in Super Fight 1. And I think Ali has better legs than Holmes. I think he's physically stronger. I think he's more durable. And I also think, even though I think Holmes has the harder jab, I think Ali's jab was a little harder for Frazier to slip than Holmes, only for the fact that Holmes is strictly straight. Ali's was up and down, and he had more variance of it. So I think that if Frazier can beat that Ali, and Holmes is going to try to do the same thing. I just don't think he would be as successful. And I think at their best, on their best night, I think Frazier gets Holmes, but obviously Holmes would have a chance to beat Foreman that we know Frazier wouldn't.
Yeah. The styles then. Foreman did have problems with great boxers, Jimmy Young, and we saw what happened in the alley fight, obviously. But I think on that power and just the spectacular nature, I think if you took a poll, most people would say that Foreman was the greater fighter than Larry Holmes. Historically, I did that.
I think that would be the case now. I agree with that. But do you remember when Larry Holmes was underrated and now he's not? Remember back then, it's like I don't get any respect. And I remember when I went to see him fight. I went to see him fight Ronaldo Snipes at the Pittsburgh Civic Arena, where we talked last week, where Holmes and Cobb and Mercado fought. And Don, I remember when Snipes knocked him down, and I remember leaving the arena that night. We were going to Cobb's post-fight party. And if somebody would have tapped me on the shoulder and said, Frank, in 20 years, you're going to consider Larry Holmes one of the all-time top 5 heavyweight greats, I think I would have said to them, you're out of your mind, you're crazy. But here we are 40 years later, and 44 years later, and there's no way I could keep him out of my top 5.
No, it's different if you see something in the moment and then you have a chance to step back and analyze it more objectively. I mean, people who follow Larry Holmes now or assess him, they're looking at films, but they're looking at his record in a book. You and I are watching him as it's taking place. You're watching him get knocked down by Snipes. We're watching Ali Frazier as it takes place. So the emotional response we have to Ali Frazier one, it's got to be greater than anybody else who's just read about it. They can be excited about it, but they can't replicate that. I'll tell you an analogy. Foreman and Holmes to me is like Ezzard Charles and Jersey Joe Walcott. When the ring had their Hall of Fame, Jersey Joe Walcott got in the year before Ezzard Charles. Now, they fought 4 times. The only knockout victory was when Walcott knocked out Charles.
In the third fight.
Now, if you brought up the fact that Ezzard Charles, one of the greatest fighters, pound for pound of all time, he's the equal to Sugar Ray Robinson, they were born the same year. 40, 50, people would have laughed. They say he's a great, capable fighter, but he's nowhere like that. And now he's revered because he's assessed as a light heavyweight. And most of the people watched him fight live, saw him on television when he was over the hill as a heavyweight. And he would be miles ahead of Jersey Joe Walcott in an evaluation. People are saying he's a better fighter than Gene Tunney. That never would have come up as a question 50, 60, 70 years ago. Teddy Brenner had the line about Charles. He said he's a great fighter unless you had to pay to see him. And he's analogous to Emil Griffith, who fought and beat everybody. But few people say he's one of the greatest of all time. But on accomplishment, you can't argue with it. But Larry was that kind of great, tactician and a wonderful fighter. But yeah, I think his reputation now has grown after he's retired and after you can look at it and assess it, soberly and objectively.
Do you know who else you can say that about? Lennox Lewis.
Oh, yeah.
I remember when he was knocked out by Oliver McCall, same thing. If somebody would have said to me in 1994, Frank, in 20 years, Lennox Lewis is going to make your top 6, 7, I would have said, no, you're crazy. And now when you look back at his career, he could box, he could punch, he could fight as the attacker, he could fight as a counterpuncher. He had a great jab, a big right hand, a good uppercut. He's a very tough matchup. I mean, the knock on him is he was stopped twice by basically one punch.
Yeah.
But as we saw, he beat those guys in rematches. He wasn't in shape for those fights. And I can't hold it against him, Don. He makes my top 6 or 7.
I'm very subjective. I worked for Lennox Lewis's management for most of his career. And I'll tell you, first of all, he was a counterpuncher. He wasn't a guy, an aggressive fighter. This is what people don't. He wasn't a guy who comes out to blow you out. Although he knocked out Michael Grant and Galata in 1 round, he was capable of that.
And he went after Razor Ruddock too.
He did, and he made that fight and stopped him. And the fights with Ray Mercer and things like that, and Tua, he was effective, but he was very cautious. I remember Manuel telling him to fight with Tua, don't mix it up, just use the jab, and that's what he did. So he followed the pattern. And he was a thinking fighter. he wasn't always the most spectacular fighter that there was in the world. But in hindsight, he beat all the fighters of the generation. We never got the fight with Riddick Bowe as a professional, because when we were going to make that, Bowe fought Galata, and there was all that controversy. In fact, most people tell you he lost the Galata Bowe, but he didn't. You know, he won the 2 fights on disqualification. So, but other than that, he dominated, everybody in his generation. Unfortunately, again, for him, he's in the shadow of Mike Tyson, who, even though he knocked him out, Tyson he's the biggest superstar in boxing, regardless of whatever he did in his personal life. He's the most revered, most recognized fighter in the world, above anybody active or retired or living today. And I think it was.
Go ahead, finish, Don. You think what?
I think Tyson was a great fighter. You know, at his peak, he was a great fighter.
Okay, so let's go down that road.
Okay.
Where would you place Tyson among your top 10 greatest heavyweights? Does he make the top 10?
He's sort of on the bottom. I tell you this. Well, this might be a statement. I think Tyson was the best of that foursome that came in that generation: Bowe, Lewis, and Holyfield. I think at his best, he was the best of those fighters. I think that when he was fighting, there was a time he said, that's the greatest heavyweight. Now, he probably was not the greatest heavyweight, but I rarely heard that said of Holyfield, Bowe, or Lennox Lewis. Now we're respecting Lewis more so then, but there was not a time when he was active. Said, boy, this is the greatest heavyweight. Could be one of the greatest of all time. I think he was effective. I think he's winning, but I don't think they had the accolades that Tyson had up until that loss to Douglas. And he came back after the loss and knocked out Henry Tillman in 1 round, and he beat Razor Ruddock twice. So he won the title back, or a portion of the championship back after that as well.
Now, see, I think I have Holyfield and Lewis above Tyson.
Oh, okay.
I think of that 4. I have Holyfield number 1. Okay. I just think he would. If I had my choice, if a boxer came from another planet and the Earth was on the line, and I could pick Holyfield, Lewis, or Tyson to face him with the Earth on the line, right, I would take Holyfield, because I think he's the toughest. I think he's the most versatile, and I just think he's more apt to find a way to win than the other 2. Tyson's a swarmer. If he comes up against a guy that can back him up or take his punch and extend him, I don't like his chances there. And then Lennox Lewis, what if he gets clipped? Even though I'm not going to say he doesn't have a great chin, but I just would be more confident in Holyfield. So I think he's the best of that group. Tyson was clearly the most exciting, the best promoted. But Don, I do have a little issue with Tyson. And I think Tyson's one of those guys that he was overrated in the 80s, and I think he's underrated today. But you could make a case as far as you could not name 5 more physically skilled heavyweights than Mike Tyson when it comes to power, speed, accuracy, and technical ability. Excuse me.
And Holyfield, indomitable. I'll tell you again. I was involved with Lewis, so you have those situations where you're more subjective. The first fight was, very controversial. Almost everybody thought, although I had that fight 7-5 in rounds, Holyfield against Lewis, and I remember sitting near Mickey Duff. He said, "How do you have it?" Because he had made a big bet on Lewis. I said, "It's very close." "Why, you're out of your mind." And I never expected to draw. But in the rematch, had they given that decision to Holyfield, I don't think it would have been scandalous. That was very close. People have said to me what they should have done is reverse those decisions. The rematch could have been the draw, and the first fight could have been the win for Lewis. But people forget how close that second fight was. And it
was very close. I think the first fight, Don, I don't think Holyfield thought much of Lewis. And just his demeanor that night didn't seem like he was into the fight. After the first fight, he realized he had to bring his A game. And I'll never forget when I asked Holyfield, I went to the Hasim Rockman Holyfield fight. Right. I believe it was in 92 in Atlantic City.
Right.
And I'm sorry, what am I saying? 92. It was 2002
Yeah,
because the following week, Tyson and Lewis were fighting. And I
right.
went up to Evander and I said, Evander, look, I says, you fought Tyson twice. You fought Lewis twice. Who do you like next week? And he looked at me and he says, Frank, he goes, I got to go with Mike. I got to go with Mike. I got to go with Mike. And I remember, Don, the way he said it, in his mind, he had much more respect for Tyson than he did Lewis.
Mhm.
And it amazed me at how quick he said that. Like he had no doubt. And I remember I picked Lewis and I thought, boy, is there something I missed?
I notice what fighters, when you ask them that, they're always going to pick somebody that they beat because that makes them look better. It's a psychological. Ask a fighter, what was your toughest fight? And 99% of the times he'll tell you a fight that he won. Because you'll say, well, what about this? This guy knocked you out. Oh, well, I lost that fight. Their mind is the toughest fight that they won. If they rarely concede it's a fight they lost that got beat. You always ask them, Frazier, what's your toughest? Oh, Quarry, or not Foreman.
Bonavina or somebody, right?
Yeah, they'll say somebody that they defeated rather than somebody defeated. I don't know, it's psychological or what it is, but that's invariably been the response I get when I ask those questions of fighters.
All right, let me give you a blitz real quick. All right, you basically have Ali number one. Who's your favorite fighter of all time? Oh, no, who do you think is the greatest pound for pound fighter of all time?
Well, I always tell people, don't ask me that. They ask that question, who's the second greatest pound for pound fighter?
Thank you.
Everybody says Sugar Ray Robinson. And I have to say that as well. Looking at him, looking at the career, looking at the body, unbelievable fighter. Yeah, he was the best. And then it comes to who's the second best, I guess.
If I said who's second best, who would you have?
Well, if you dismiss heavyweights, I would go him, Ali, and then Joe Louis and Johnson, Langford, Harry Greb, Henry Armstrong. That'd be my list going to that point. And then we drop down, and then you sort of angle around Duran, Benny Leonard, Joe Gans. And then most of those guys I'm reading about, seeing a little bit of film clips. But I tend to say, how many great fighters did they fight and beat during their career? How dominant were they in their career? And there's a great book by Bill James about the historic baseball abstract. And he tries to compare who were the best players at each division and rates them. And he said he goes on contemporary reports seeing what did contemporary writers and fans think of those players. And what did the contemporary audience think about it? Now, we say in retrospect, we can look at a fighter more objectively. And Ezra Charles is a great beneficiary of that. Gene Tunney has lost that in recent years. So I go on, who they defeated. I use the Hall of Famers as one criteria that they beat 6 or 7. And some of them beat the Hall of Famers when they were 40 years old. So it doesn't count. But you've got to look at how dominant they were when they were fighting. And what great fighters they fought or avoided. Yeah.
But Don, what do you do in a case like Marciano, where I would say it's a consensus that wasn't the strongest heavyweight era?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again,
how would you rate him?
My 5 heavyweights are, and again, because it's a lot historical, I guess, I put Ali 1, Lewis 2, Johnson 3, Dempsey 4, Marciano 5. Now, do I think Foreman or Liston or Holmes could have beaten Marciano and Dempsey in a possible fight? Possibly, but I think that the historical impact of those guys is so profound, and it has to be for some reason, other than it's not just what they accomplished in the ring outside of it. So it may affect my judgment, but they must have made such a tremendous impact that they still are, talked of in such reverence today. Maybe boxing was bigger when it, produced those 5 guys, that nothing has equaled them. But, Marciano, I think he beat the best of his time. He wasn't manufactured to be 49-0. And he was a fighter with a lot of flaws. We know that. He wasn't a big man. He'd be a cruiserweight today. So nobody says, was he the greatest cruiser of all time? But I think the fact that he managed to do that, which was remarkable, did he retire in the right place at the right time? Probably, though I think he would have knocked out Floyd Patterson had they fought for his 50th fight. But he managed to do it. He managed to go 20-0 and then 30-0 and then 40-0, which is an incredible achievement. And if you look at him, he's a tremendous puncher. He did beat 3 of the greatest fighters of all time and more, Joe Louis and Ezra Charles. They were past their peak, but that's what was around at that time. You can't fault him. That Walcott was an older man, but he was the heavyweight champ. that Lewis, when Lewis fought Marciano, he was the number one rated heavyweight, and Marciano knocked him out. So, Foreman and the size and Holmes and the size, yes, but I think on the accomplishments, it's very hard for me to dismiss those guys.
Let me ask you this. Now, I'm one of the few. You have to sell me on Jack Johnson other than he was the first black heavyweight champ. But let me just frame that.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at his record, I'm not blown away.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't see some of the things that I've read.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at him on film,
mm-hmm.
I don't see it. Now, there are only about 7 films of him.
Yeah.
So if there were only 7 films of Tyson or Lewis or
Mm-hmm.
Ali, it's not fair to make that assessment. But when I look at Jack Johnson, Don, and I try to put him in with a Prime Dempsey or a Lewis or a Liston, I don't have him doing well.
Yeah. I say he's the hardest great fighter that I can justify on the record being a great fighter. I think.
So you agree with me?
Yeah, I do agree with you. And I don't have an emotional connection with Johnson. Is it something that the legend? I mean, I think the fact that Nat Fleischer rated him number 1 got a tremendously disproportionate sense of adulation for Jack Johnson. I've always maintained that Ali, after he saw that number 1, he psychologically tried to pattern himself on Johnson. Not like he was a
lot of similarities.
Yes, he had a hate in this. He had to find a way to make himself the victim. He wasn't going to be a victim because there was much integration at that point in time. So he became a Muslim, almost to say, well, this will do it. He didn't go into the armed forces. I don't know that subconsciously he wanted to be Jack Johnson and said, I'll create myself into a pariah. To be a legend and embrace some kind of antisocial group or antisocial lifestyle that will make me that. I don't know, but it seems to a pattern there. But yeah, I think his victory over Jim Jeffries, who really is washed away today. And I think he was one of the greatest heavyweights. I said the 3 great Caucasian heavyweights of all time, Dempsey, Jeffries, and Marciano. And he's completely dismissed because of that loss to Johnson, which people don't realize was 6 years after his last fight. He dominated an early generation of heavyweights. He beat Sharkey, he beat Corbett, he beat Fitzsimmons. And he was retired because there was no one else for him to fight. Johnson had lost to Marvin Hart, said there's no challenge out there. I'll quit. And they induced him with this incredible $200,000 payday. It would be like $100 million in buying power today. Having said that, so he beats an old Jeffries. He beats Stanley Ketchel, who he outweighed by 40 pounds. It'll be like
middleweight.
Nino Benvenuti or even Monzon or Hagler. There'll be no contest. And he gets knocked out by Choinsky. He gets knocked out by a fighter, Klondike Haynes. He fights a draw of Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, who weighed 165 pounds. Takes him 15 rounds to stop Tommy Burns, who was 168 pounds. So he said, well, where's
5'7".
Yeah. So, I mean, it's 3 fights. And even though one of the fights, he also outweighed his fighter by, I measure him on, he defeated Joe Jeanette, who was a great fighter. He defeated Sam McVeigh a number of times, who was an outstanding fighter. And he beat Sam Langford, who he did outweigh by 35 pounds. So
and early in Langford's career.
Yes. So, it's very hard. He beat Fitzsimmons when he was in his 40s. But he didn't avoid fighters. He didn't fight the best black fights. He could have given a rematch to Jeanette for the title. He could have given him a rematch to McVeigh or to Langford for the title. And people said, well, they wouldn't have bought it. But he fought in France with a fighter, Jim Johnson, who fights a draw with him. And he was knocked out by Langford. And in the draw, there were 3 scores, and only one voted for.
Boy, that's a scary picture. Don't laugh, Brian.
He'll come back on.
Okay. 1 ass cheek and 3 toes.
He probably just shut himself off there, accidentally trying to fix his phone. That's probably what that was.
He'll be back in a second. He's a good guest.
That's Sonia, by the way, who keeps chiming in. There he is.
Hello, Sonia.
Okay, I think there we go.
I'm in the
There
Jack-
we
I'm,
go.
I'm in the Jack Johnson era technologically. I apologize. Go
Great
back to
segue, Don.
Go back to daguerreotypes when you're dealing with me. But
So
yeah, he is hard.
basically,
Almost impossible. Yeah.
Don, what you said are a lot. It's a lot of my contention with Jack Johnson. But today, if you say that, you're almost a pariah. But I have to go by what my eyes see and what you just detailed, which is the same kind of faults I have with his record. So he does not make my top 10.
Yeah.
He doesn't.
Now he was dominant at this time. Look, if I use the Hall of Fame fighters as a criteria. He beat this many Hall of Famers. Well, Ali beat 7 Hall of Famers, Dempsey beat 7 Hall of Famers, and Jack Johnson beat 7 Hall of Famers. But if you examine it, Jack Johnson beat Bob Fitzsimmons when he was 41 or 42 years of age. He beat Jeffries when he made a comeback after a 6-year
At
layoff.
36.
Right. He beat 3 guys that he outweighed by 30 pounds, Ketchel, Langford, and Burns. And maybe Burns is not a Hall of Fame. Only the fact he had the heavyweight title got him into that. So if you look at the context, so the 3 fights that, again, for me, his greatest win was probably the Joe Jeanette victory. And because Joe Jeanette is greatly underrated today. But Joe Jeanette beat him. And I think Jeanette at the time had like 12 fights when he fought Johnson. They matured at different stages of the career. So, yeah, he's the hardest guy, prima facie, to make a case for that he was a great fighter. And people will tell you the hardest one, yeah.
I think you stated that well, and I agree. Now, let me ask you this. And our friend Russell Peltz framed it this way. If I said to you, Jack, if I said, Don, who do you think would win between, say, I don't know, let's just say Joe Frazier and Jack Johnson? Russell's contention is, well, do we go back to, are they fighting in 1910 or are they fighting in 1971? How would you match those guys together?
Well, look, I don't know what the 1910 might have favored Frazier more because he could have done anything he wanted, hit low, hit them all. And not that Frazier was a dirty fighter, but he was so aggressive, nobody would have.
He did go low sometimes, though.
Yeah. So he was a great, Frazier never fought Harold Johnson. I mean, they were a different era. He was a great boxer. He would tie you up. He would make it hard for
great inside fighter.
Yeah, I mean, was he capable of rising to the occasion if he had to? Jack Johnson, possibly, but you'd have to look at it and figure, well, Frazier would blow him out. But technically, Johnson did fight a guy and went 27 rounds. I mean, the fact that he could do something like that is pretty phenomenal. He lost the fight. Technically, I think Johnson had a chance of beating Frazier, but I don't know how much that is based on fact. People revered him who saw him fight. I mean, most people in his time thought he was one of the great fighters. I don't think they thought he was necessarily better than Jeffries, and I don't think people thought subsequently he was better than Jack Dempsey, but he was well respected, and he, I think it'd be a very hard fight. I think on the style, Johnson could have tied up Frazier and made it difficult, but on power, Frazier does it. But I would think Johnson could possibly beat him. Again, this is all just on instinct. I don't know if the facts could back that up.
I would favor Frazier heavily in that fight, but let me. Where was I going to go with this? There was something I just lost my train of thought thinking about that, and there was something that you said regarding Jack Johnson.
Jack Johnson trying to assess him of the legend over his accomplishments, or how we were talking about Peltz, how he said about if they.
Well, if I said to him, if I said, Russell, who would you take? Joe Frazier, Jack Johnson, the first thing he would say to me, well, Frank, are they fighting in Johnson's era or are they fighting in Frazier's era?
All right, but I don't know.
And I would say, well, I'm going to take Frazier from March of 71 and I'm going to take Johnson in whatever his best fight was and then try to match them that way.
Right. Yeah. Well, see, there's 2 ways of doing it. Do you take 2 guys at their peak if they fought each other, or do you say who accomplished more during the course of their career? I mean, that's another way to look at it. Bill James, and I like to refer him because I'm always thinking about doing this great book, and I talked to you and Jack about collaborating on this historic boxing abstract to compare these fights and put it on paper and make the arguments. And he brings up who's the greater pitcher, Warren Spahn or Sandy Koufax. Warren Spahn had a greater career value over the 20-odd years.
Koufax had a higher peak.
Right, higher peak value. So who are they pitching match? Who do you bring in? It's the 7th game of the World Series. Bases are loaded and 2 outs. Who do you bring up out of the bullpen? You have Spahn or Koufax?
And you know that is, see, but don't you think that's basically when we break down sports, that has a lot to do with it. That goes a lot of ways. Bases loaded.
Yeah.
For 2 outs. Who do I want up to extend the game?
Yeah.
Who? Right. I mean, who would it be? Would it be Ted Williams? Would it be Pete Rose? Who would it be? Tony Gwynn? It's like all those things are, or Ty Cobb. Okay. So it's like you have the argument with the accomplishment, and then you have the argument with peak. But the accomplishment argument, if you have a listen or a Foreman case, kind of gets cut short, and they kind of get shortchanged because who they lose to. They lost the title to Ali. And you know, Don, as I get older, this is the thought I had that slipped my mind. I'm starting to get to the point where I only feel comfortable speaking implicitly in definitive terms on fighters I saw.
Right.
I've seen everybody from Ali to Usyk. Okay. I've seen a ton of films of Liston, a ton of films on Lewis, all the stuff that there is of Marciano, the films on Dempsey. But as you said, I didn't live through the period, and the argument I use, there's 2 arguments I use.
Yeah.
Michael Jordan and LeBron James.
Okay.
A lot of guys that are 40 and under that didn't see prime Michael Jordan will say that LeBron is better. Right. And I will say to those guys, I mean, there's an argument for that, but not to sound like the all know-it-all, but I lived through both eras. And in my mind, there's no doubt I want Jordan.
Right.
Same thing with Floyd Mayweather and, say, Sugar Ray Leonard.
Right.
I have nephews that are 40 or whatever, and they grew up in the Mayweather era. They never saw him lose. They didn't live through the Leonard era, Don. And it's like I said, well, you don't know how good this guy was because you didn't see him. Or I saw the best Leonard and I saw the best Mayweather. And it's like, as I get older, I realize that I'm most comfortable speaking on what I saw.
Yeah. Yeah. If I go by that, I will say, look, I saw probably, with the exception of Johansson, everybody has held the heavyweight title from Floyd Patterson until now. Mostly, and all of them in person. I saw Liston's last fight with Wepner in Jersey City. I saw Patterson a number of times. He fought on a promotion I worked on with Pedro Augusto, but I saw the last fight he had when he fought Ali. I saw when he fought Bonavena in the Garden. I saw the fight with Charlie Green. And to me, Ali and Frazier were the 2 best fights I saw in person. Foreman with the spectacular win over Frazier. But Frazier had beaten better fighters to me than Foreman going up to the title. He'd stopped Chavallo.
Absolutely.
First guy ever to do it. Beat Bonavena the 2 times. The first one coming off the deck twice. What hard, and then Philly just war. And Jerry Quarry stopping him twice. These probably the 2 best. I judge what I saw. Now looking at Liston, I saw him fight, but I saw him fight Chuck Wepner. That Liston would not have beaten Joe Frazier that I saw.
No.
Ellis and those guys. So, and Floyd Patterson at that point, I don't think he was one of the greatest, but he won. So I saw these guys at the end, like I saw Harold Johnson's last fight. Well, based on just what I saw, he's never going to have beaten a Michael Spinks or a Bob Fawcett, regardless of what people say happened 20 years ago. So to go by what you say, yes, then I would say, Ali, Frazier, the tops, at their peak. Foreman are the best I've seen. Holmes, and then you go down to Lewis and Tyson and that. Based only on that. Yeah, it's very easy to read a book and say, this is the win, this is the loss, and this guy won 196 fights. And yeah, you can't walk away from that. But it's like you're looking at a ball play and say, Ty Cobb must have been great with that 366 lifetime batting average. But I saw Willie Mays play, or I saw Hank Aaron play, so I can, judge on that 3-dimensional thing. And I agree with you with Leonard over Mayweather. He was Jose Napoles was my idol as well. Him and Liston were the first guys that I followed, and I covered all his fights. And people, I say, I think Leonard was a better fighter. Wow, you love Napoles. It doesn't mean I don't think the other guy was a greater fighter. At his peak, he had the fastest hands of any fighter I ever saw. A tremendous, just a great, great fighter.
You're talking Sugar Ray Leonard.
Yeah, yeah.
Jack Don, he really was all that. He could box, he could punch.
Mm-hmm.
He had unbelievable hand speed and combinations. He never let his opponent's punches go unanswered. He had that mean streak. He was durable.
Mm-hmm.
I was awed by Leonard. I sparred him once
in
1979, and it was scary. He did. He hit me with. He was getting ready to fight Tony Schiavone.
Oh, okay.
It was June of 1979.
Oh, okay.
And and it was early in the day. It was like 12 o'clock. We're at Frazier's gym, and he needed somebody to move around with. And at that time, I'm about 163 pounds.
Oh.
I've had about 20 amateur fights, but I was pretty durable and rough. So George Benton said, look, he said, I have my amateur middleweight. He goes, he'll come after you for some rounds. He goes, just don't try to kill him. So we get in, we do 2 rounds, and Don, Leonard hit me with a triple left hook. He hit one to my elbow, one to my shoulder, and then one to my chin.
Yeah.
So after we get done, I go up to him. I said, Ray, that hook to the shoulders was a trap and setup to get me to bring my hand down, wasn't it? He says, Frank, he goes, it's one of my favorite moves. He goes, and you're one of the few guys that actually caught what I did. And he said, yes, that was it. And it's like, it was beautiful. It's like, boom, 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 boom. And like when the second one came, my instinct was just to drop my hand a little bit. And then he came over with the left to the chin. But that's not why I am prejudiced to him. I agree with you. I think he would have beat Napoles. And I have some friends whose opinion I value, and they're roughly my age. And they will say they think that Leonard is the greatest pound for pound fighter of their lifetime.
Wow. Yeah. No, he was a great fighter. He, up there, the people also forget, with distance, things change, perceptions change. That first Duran fight was very close. That could have gone to Lennon and it would have been no scandal at all. But he was such an underdog. He had that charisma, Duran. And I think was it one judge that had 10 rounds even, something insane like that?
He had it 3-2-10.
It was a crazy
3 Duran, 2 Leonard, and 10 even.
Yes. Well,
he should have been fired on the spot.
What is that? That's insane. I hope that he was. And, to carry that and it just squeaked by. And if it wasn't Roberto Duran, any other fighter, Leonard would have got the decision that night. And he completely humiliated Duran the next day. I mean, Duran has said since he says, I was willing to accept losing, but I wasn't willing to accept being humiliated. And that's basically what happened.
And some people do not realize that fighters fear being humiliated more than losing.
Yeah. You can have the victory, but you're not going to.
We only have a minute or so left, Don. Let me just say this. I thoroughly enjoyed this. We're going to have to do it again. But real quick, Sonny Liston is one of your guys. And I think aside from Joe Louis, Sonny Liston is the second greatest boxer puncher in heavyweight history. How do you look at that?
I would find it very hard to disagree with that, because the guys like Dempsey and Marciano were one-dimensional, great fighters, but one-dimensional. Liston had the jab, he had the right hand, he could set you up, and I wouldn't dispute that, Frank. I think he was a more rounded fighter than George Foreman.
Oh, I don't think there's a case that people, when they think of Sonny Liston, they think of Cleveland Williams, but no, he was a much better boxer. He was a two-handed puncher, but Sonny Liston was an outstanding boxer, and he was a natural born fighter from what I've watched.
Yeah, great fighter. Absolutely. Yes. And he, I think he's getting his just desserts today as well. I think people are now recognizing him as a greater fighter. It's terrible how they dismissed him after the 2 losses to Ali, which was ridiculous. I think a lot of that was the sports writers being embarrassed for picking him to win so easily. And I think they felt affronted when he didn't win. But that's a tale for another day. Yeah.
I think he is the most underrated heavyweight champ in history. On that, Don, thank you so much for coming on. I had a blast, and I'm sure we'll be doing this again.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me. And Jack, happy birthday to you. And I'm glad that I screwed up enough so your fans will be demanding you come back now for next week. And I don't
think you screwed up at all, Dom. The only thing, I think the Jets won yesterday, so Jack does have a happy birthday. Didn't they beat? I think they beat the Browns. So
they did.
Anyhow,
that's it. And they fired the Giants coach, so that's a vote of confidence for the Jets. Let's see how long he lasts. But I'm glad they won.
That's a good point. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.